Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 931B, and today's date is March 29th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. and Turkey are now implementing the next plan, and something big is about to happen. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, in past reports, we've been talking about the FBI, Apple, how we knew this whole entire agenda was to try somehow, some way, to get the keys to the entire cell phone system to spy on every single person. And the FBI realized they were getting absolutely no traction. And the whole story of them breaking into the iPhone, that they just can't do it, it's too difficult. We always knew that this was completely false. It was fake, phony, and false. And we see at this point, it's all over the corporate media that the FBI, they were able to successfully hack the terrorist phone, and they were able to do it without Apple's help. Well, we knew this before. Actually, John McAfee, he did it. And we knew that this wasn't difficult to do. The FBI was playing a game. The game wasn't going in their direction, and they needed a safe way to get out of it. So they have now dropped the case against Apple at this point. And we can see, well, this scheme didn't work. On to the next. Now, out in Belgium, we realize the false flag is now being pushed in all different directions. One of the agendas, as we've said before, is that they're going to need more security. That they're going to need some type of law like the U.S. has, where they can spy on the people, they can have more security, take away the rights of the people. And what's very interesting is that ex-CIA chief is out there, and that's Director Michael Hayden. He's saying that the European Union has incredibly high standards for privacy rights, and the rules made in Brussels may be hindering the ability of a member nation to fight terrorism. He says what you've got are folks in Brussels, the Euro institutions, imposing incredibly high standards with regard to personal privacy at the expense of what the national governments are still expected to do, which is keep their citizens alive. No, that's not what they're supposed to be doing. And what they're doing at this point, they're making the case for people to give up their rights, which will allow them access to all their private data, to control the people, to spy on them, just like they did here in the United States. And you can see they're definitely pushing all of this in that direction. Now, the governments, they're not put in a place to keep us alive. The governments are put into place to work with the people, to support the people, not to have false flags, not to scare people, to get bigger budgets, not to spy on people. But we can see the mentality of the government and these agencies. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, out in Brazil, everything is really falling apart. And we see that Rossoff's coalition has completely collapsed. It looks like they're moving for impeachment. And we see Temer's PMDB has announced a split with President Rossoff's coalition government. And it seems that there's a coup d'etat happening now in Brazil. And we're going to have to watch that situation very carefully. We'll have to see what happens. And we see things are rapidly falling apart. Now, France is out there, and they are making urgent calls saying that the Libya unity government must be set up. There's no more time to waste. We must have the unity government in Tripoli. Now, they can keep screaming about this all they want. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, because the elected government in Tripoli doesn't want this puppet government in their country. And we can see right now they're continually making these urgent calls because if this unity government is not put into place, we know what's going to happen. They're going to invade Libya one way or another. Something will occur and they will invade. Now, if the unity government does get into Tripoli, the unity government is going to invite in the coalition forces, and they're going to be going after all those people who are against the puppet government. All those people will then be called terrorists, like Al-Qaeda, and they will hunt them down. And we know there are special op teams already in Libya, probably making preparations to take out the government in Tripoli. We know the UK has troops there. We know Jordan. We know the US. We know France. And I wouldn't be surprised if plans are in motion right now to try to remove the elected government in Tripoli so the unity government can walk on in. Now, in past reports, we reported on Lebanon, how Saudi Arabia, Qatar, US, and other countries were removing their government officials from Lebanon. And they put up travel alerts, warnings, saying, don't go to Lebanon. And what we're seeing right now, since Syria, where Russia and the Syrian armed forces have been pushing the Islamic State out of the country, a lot of the Islamic State fighters are now crossing into Lebanon. And we're seeing a buildup of the Islamic State on the border of Lebanon. Because as we know, the Syrian army and the Russian forces have been liberating all these towns and cities, and they needed a place for these fighters to go. Now, of course, Lebanon borders Syria, Turkey borders Syria, Jordan borders Syria, and we're going to have to watch this situation very, very carefully because we see things are starting to build up, heat up in this area. And we can see a new plan is forming at this point, and we see the director of the CIA, William Brennan. He's out there saying that the U.S. still demands the removal of Assad, and he wants Assad to follow through on their agreements to implement the cessation of hostilities in Syria. He also says the U.S. government's consistent support for genuine political transition in Syria and the need for Assad's departure in order to facilitate a transition that reflects the will of the Syrian people. Now, it sounds great. It sounds fantastic that the will of the Syrian people. The problem is the Western governments, they've been doing polls in this entire area to see and get a read on what the people are thinking and what they're doing. So there are many different Western polling firms that have been polling the Syrian people. And they've been asking questions like, do you support Assad as being the Syrian leader? Would you vote for Assad once again? And they're finding out that 55% of the Syrians saying yes, they support Assad as being the leader. Now, the Western polling firms, they've done other polls where they said, who is to blame for all of this in Syria? And the poll shows that 82% of Syrians, they're blaming the U.S. for what has happened in Syria. The same poll found that 79% agree that foreign fighters made war worse. It also found that 70% agree that they do not want their country divided. So I know the U.S. is continually using propaganda and spewing the idea that the people do not support Assad, but from every action from the people, we see the opposite happening. Back in 2014, they had elections. They were monitored internationally. Assad won by like 82, 87, 85%. Today, if there was a vote, the U.S. knows that the people of Syria, they're going to vote for Assad. Think about it. He worked with Russia. They got rid of the terrorists in Syria. They liberated towns and cities and freed the people of torture and living under the rule of terrorism. Why wouldn't they vote for him? And the U.S. knows this, and they can't let this go to a vote because their entire scheme would go down the drain. Their entire plan would be ruined at this point. Now, we know that John Kerry met with Sergei Lavrov in Russia, and they discussed the transition in Syria. They discussed a draft constitution, and they were going to revisit this in August. And right now, Russia is saying it is completely impossible to name a specific date of when this draft constitution is going to be ready. And remember, they can't come up with a constitution unless the Syrian government is involved. And the Syrian government wasn't really in this meeting between Russia and the U.S. So at this point, nothing really has been planned. Now, we heard John Kerry talk about Plan B, about splitting up Syria, but really Plan B was never Plan B. Plan B is really Plan A. And if negotiations fail, the reality is they're going to be trying to push Plan A. Plans to balkanize Syria, Iraq, and other Middle Eastern states were laid out a long time ago by U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice in 2006. It was part of the so-called Project for a New Middle East. This was a carbon copy of the Oded-Yinyan plan drawn up in Israel in 1982. The plan outlined the way in which Middle Eastern countries would be balkanized along sectarian lines. And Syria right now is saying that, no, this is not going to work. We don't want to be federalized. And it's not going to happen because we say it's not going to. And what we're seeing is that if they decided to split up the Middle East, what they're going to do is they're just going to draw along sectarian lines, and they're not going to consider, if any state or population can sustain itself. This means that a small amount of people will get all the resources, and we know which ones those are going to be, and the rest of the Syrian population will be left without any. And we know this is their major plan, is to split up Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and keep all the resources to themselves, and the people will get absolutely nothing. And this is their main agenda for the entire area. Now, Obama is meeting with security advisors on the Islamic State threat right after what happened in Brussels. And of course, we know this is not about the Islamic State threat. We know he knows about the Islamic State. It is the proxy army of the United States government central bankers. And we can see at this point in time that things might be in play at this point. Obama said he was not going to meet with Erdogan. Erdogan is saying that he's going to meet with Obama at the summit this week. And the summit I'm talking about is the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington. And what we're seeing right now is that a lot of this stuff that's happening is happening behind the scenes, where the president is out there and the corporate media is out there trying to convince us of one thing, where Erdogan is this crazy dictator and the U.S. can't control him. And on the other end, behind the scenes, the U.S. is working with Turkey, vetoing, like the Russian UN security resolution, which tried to stop Turkey from shelling into Syria. Now, of course, the corporate media is not picking up on that, but that tells us that behind the scenes, the U.S. is still supporting Turkey, no matter what they're saying to the corporate media and to the public. Now, very interestingly, the NSA director made a secret visit to Israel last week. And who knows what they talked about, but every time we see one of these visits, something is being planned. Now, Turkey is continually firing on the PYD, the Democratic Union Party, and they're hitting areas still in Syria. They're bombing in Iraq. And just today, something very interesting just happened. The Department of Defense announced that, in coordination with the Secretary of State, they have authorized the ordered departure of all DoD dependents not assigned to Chief of Mission Authority. They want people who are at the Incirlik Air Base, Izmir, and other places in Turkey to leave. They want family members out of this area. And they're ordering 700 military family members out of this area. Now, the question is, what is going on? We know yesterday, Israel has ordered their people out of Turkey. So something big is about to happen in Turkey. Some type of big event. What it is, we don't know exactly what it is. What it will be used for is most likely to go into Syria. Now, U.S. and Turkey, they're discussing plans to expand cooperation in order to put greater pressure on the Islamic State. Code word being more pressure in Syria to remove Assad. And we see right now that Turkey and the U.S. are formulating a new plan. The U.S. announced plans to provide additional $20 million to aid help relief within this area, and a lot of the funds are directed towards Turkey. Very interesting. So we're seeing the Islamic State fighters, they're building up in Lebanon, coming from Syria. We see people are being evacuated from Turkey, travel warning going into effect, warning the citizens there. We see the U.S. is discussing plans and further cooperation, and the U.S. is providing them with funds. And we know that Jay Johnson was in Turkey building up the borders, putting up surveillance equipment on the border of Syria. And we know at this point that the ceasefire peace talks, they're going to go absolutely nowhere because they can't allow Assad to stay in power. We saw and we talked about the Western polls. They're not in the favor of the U.S., so now they're moving in a completely different direction, and they're planning something behind the scenes. And we're just waiting for the big bang. Now, the last 2 days, we see the capital was on lockdown. First, we had a shooter, and it looks like there was some type of drill going on at the same time. And we also see that it was locked down for a suspicious package. Now, why is all this happening in the capital at this point? Well, most likely is to pass new laws to bring in more security to lock down government buildings. Why do they want to lock down government buildings? Because they realize as the collapse comes, they need more and more security. They need more forces involved in protecting their interests. And this is why we're seeing all this. And I wouldn't be surprised the next couple of days, all of a sudden they say, yes, we're putting up fences, we're bringing in more security, and we're creating a larger buffer zone in front of these buildings. Now, the United States is aware of terrorists to get raw materials to make nuclear devices. The U.S. right now estimates there are about 2,000 metric tons of usable nuclear materials that terrorists have the intent and capability to access and produce nuclear devices. We know that terrorists have the intent and the capability to turn the raw materials into nuclear devices and use them on the public. We know Israel was testing dirty bombs in the desert. A couple of reports ago, we talked about how there was a small nuke which was transported into the northern region of Syria, which is the southern portion of Turkey. Could this be the reason they evacuated many of the people from that area? Are they planning to detonate a nuclear weapon in this area? Could that be the event? Well, this is something we're going to have to watch, because we know at this point, as the economy falls apart, as they lose their initiative in Syria, as the central bank is getting ready to take the blame for the entire economy falling apart, they're going to need some type of an event. They're going to need to plan something like they've done in the past in Paris, in Brussels, in Canada, in Australia. But these little things, they're not going to pass right now as being, ooh, this is a major terror threat. They need something big. They need something large to scare the people. A nuclear bomb would do it. A small, dirty bomb would do it, I think. And if that doesn't work, they're going to have to up their game. And this is what we're watching right now, because we know at this point their backs are against the wall. The economy is accelerating in collapse mode. There's no escape from this, and they know it, and they need to get a war started. They need to cover up what is coming. So in the next month or two, we're going to see things really heat up. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.